Hello, I'm David Breeden. I'm a senior minister at First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, a historically humanist congregation, and this is Coffee and Wisdom when we think about religion and philosophy in American society and in history, where it's been, where it's going, and where we are now. This week, we've been looking at what I'm calling the attack of the SBNRs. That is, the spiritual but not religious. Who are they? What do they want? Etc. Today, I want to take a little pause to think about the immediate effects of the COVID shutdown, because this has been a great concern. Will it accelerate the precipitous drop in church attendance in the United States, especially among the liberals, and especially among the spiritual but not religious, and also then the nuns, which we're going to be talking about tomorrow and on Friday. So will the COVID shutdown change religion forever? It's a question that a lot of people are asking. This is the sign that we have at First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis. Our building is closed, but our hearts are open. Join us online, and then we have our web address. A lot of congregations are doing just that right now. A cursory drive down any neighborhood, you will see these kinds of signs out in front of congregations. So are people going to come back is the question. And maybe is the answer to that question, will COVID change religion in the U.S. forever? So let's take some looks at these things. I have mentioned the Barna group before. This is a group that specifically looks at American religion, especially American conservative religion. Although, as I've mentioned before, I do get a call from time to time at my office asking me some questions when they're looking into, what does the minister think of this or that or another thing. So the first slide here, COVID-19 online church attendance among practicing Christians. Now, Unitarian Universalists do count in this tally in general as a mainline religious group, just like the Presbyterians of the United Church of Christ. So 35% are still and only attending their pre-COVID church. All right, that's good. Have switched churches from the pre-COVID church, about 14%, again, of practicing Christians. That means people who are going to church or were going to church at least a couple of times a month. Have stopped attending church during COVID, 32% have, and are viewing multiple churches throughout the month. That is, those who are online and watching different churches, kind of shopping around or seeing what other people are doing. And that is 18%, again, of practicing Christians. Now, hang on, because that's not the entire picture. COVID-19 online church attendance by generation. Now, we're talking about online, people watching online every Sunday. First Unitarian Society, we have our assembly that is online. They're about roughly 45 minutes to an hour. So how's that shaking out among people? Now, among boomers, 40% of the people, of the practicing people before COVID, have stayed with the same church. 11% have switched churches, and 26% have stopped attending. And we know a lot of people, they just don't like the fact of not being with their friends in the pews. And so, what's the point? And a lot of people throw up their hands for that reason. But notice how this changes with age. With the Gen X generation, 31% have stayed in the same church, 17% have switched churches, and 35% have stopped attending altogether. But now look at the millennial generation. 30% have stayed with the same church, less than a third. 8% have switched, meaning not much interest in switching, but 50% no longer attend. So half of millennials, younger people, are not attending online churches at the moment. So that's a worrying sign in the religious landscape. Few expect pandemic to permanently alter their religious routines. All right. So the percentage of U.S. adults who say that when the coronavirus outbreak is over, they will attend religious services in person, just, sort of like they did before. Okay. Well, of all U.S. adults, most people say that did not attend services in person before outbreak and will not attend when the outbreak is over at 43%. Okay, now this is not practicing Christians anymore. This is just everybody. So 43% already didn't, and they're not going to, and nothing has changed, in other words. Now, about 5% are going to do this less often, and so you've got roughly 48% of people who don't have much interest anymore. 10% more often. Now, there has been discussion about will the trials and tribulations of COVID drive people back into churches? Well, the answer is probably not, as a matter of fact, right? And about as often at 42%. Now, of those who typically attend religious services at least monthly, 73%, 73% will roughly do what they've always done, 3/4 almost, right? And some will attend less often. So not a lot, right? Not a lot of change is what we're seeing in this. And that is one of the interesting things about it. The giving has gone down. I don't have a chart for that, but slightly over time. But it also has gone down for all nonprofits. So people are giving overall in the U.S. less money to nonprofits and charitable organizations and churches, et cetera. Okay. Now, the percent of U.S. adults who say that when the coronavirus outbreak is over, they will watch religious services online or on TV, right, than before the outbreak. All right. Now, by the way, I did switch to Pew Research, and this is Pew tends to be a broader group that they're looking at than the Barna group that's really interested just in Christians, basically. All right. So of all adults in the U.S., 66% have not watched services online or on TV in the last month. All right. So, yeah. This is not changing things very much. Typically attend religious services at least monthly, and you see how these things, the norm is not changing all that much. Again, there has been a lot of talk about how many people will change to online only or online most of the time, and the answer is, probably not a lot, at least of what people are talking about right now. What does the data show? Mostly pre-COVID trends are continuing, not reversing, okay? So the number of people leaving church has not accelerated greatly, but it hasn't stopped either, okay? Not either. So broad-based declines in the share of Americans who say they are Christian. So the percentage point change between 09 and 18/19 in the share who identify as Christian, minus 12% of men and minus 11% of women. All right. So the big thing here, again, is this look at the nones and the younger millennials. So among the silent generation, there really hasn't been very much change in terms of the drop. Baby boomers, some. Gen X, and you see how this is almost always a stair step in terms of how these things work, and millennials, those born between 1981 and 1996, minus 16. So you see how this really is reflecting, again, this general exit out of religion by younger people. All right. Now, the large generation gap in American religion. In 2018-19, the percentage of U.S. adults who identify as, silent generation, those born before 1945, 84% still say they are Christian, right? 4% non-Christian faiths and 10% unaffiliated. Now notice that with boomers, again, this is a stair-step fashion, and this is true in almost all the stats. Baby boomers at 76%, Gen Xers at 67%, and millennials have for the first time crossed that line below 50%. Okay, below 50%. who identify as Christian. Notice that the numbers in non-Christian faiths are not growing exponentially, somewhat, and we've talked a lot about alternative spiritualities here in the U.S. during Coffee and Wisdom, but that is not affecting most people. What they're doing is disaffiliating, so in large numbers. So this is, again, very generational in the way that this is working. 2018, 19% of U.S. adults who say they attend religious services. Well, 50% of the silent generation, 22% of millennials. Again, this drop that's going on in the group. In the U.S., the number of religious nuns has grown by nearly 30 million over the past decade. 30 million. When we talk percentages, of course, we forget about how many millions we're talking about. But when we reflect on things in millions of human beings, it looks a little bit different. And so 30 million over the last decade have become none. And you see the religiously unaffiliated growing, again, pretty steep curve there. And again, here's an important stat. And when we talk about this difference in this chasm between Americans in terms of their political views, religious views, et cetera. Among Democrats, 1/3 are now none, all right? 1/3 of Democrats identify as no religious affiliation whatsoever, and about 6 in 10 attend religious service infrequently or never. So over half of Democrats are really not all that engaged in the American religious scene. And that's important to notice. Whereas with Republicans, it is considerably different, right? So very interesting. And this is, again, feeds into what we call an ontology in theology. That is, how do you see reality? Well, Republican Christians and Democratic secular people are seeing reality in very different ways because of various religious connotations. Well, another thing I do want to think about today, I know I'm throwing a lot of numbers around, but I think the overall trends are pretty clear. How many atheists are there in the United States? And this is a question that plagues people. When I started identifying as atheist agnostic back in the 1970s, somewhere between 1% and 3% of Americans said they were atheist agnostic. Nowadays, is somewhere between 7 and 9%, so it has definitely doubled, but it's still a very low number overall. Except that maybe it's not. So Dr. Will Jervis and Dr. Maxine Nolly use indirect questioning, not merely the question, do you believe in God? Do you believe in God? They think, as researchers, is not a good question to be asking to really get at people's beliefs in deity, the supernatural, etc. This is the abstract of their paper, and I find it very interesting and very revealing, perhaps, about how the numbers lie. One crucible for theories of religion is their ability to predict and explain the patterns of belief and disbelief. Yet religious non-belief is often heavily stigmatized, potentially leading many atheists to refrain from outing themselves even in anonymous polls. We use the unmatched count technique and Bayesian estimation to indirectly estimate atheist prevalence in 2 nationally representative samples of 2,000 U.S. adults apiece. Widely cited telephone polls, Gallup, Pew, etc., suggest U.S. atheist prevalence of only 3 through 11%. In contrast, our most credible indirect estimate is 26%, albeit with considerable estimate and method uncertainty. Our data and model predict that atheist prevalence exceeds 11% with greater than 0.99 probability and exceeds 20% with roughly 0.8 probability. Prevalence estimates of 11% were even less credible than estimates of 40%, and all intermediate estimates were more credible. Some popular theoretical approaches to religious cognition may require heavy revision to accommodate actual levels of religious disbelief. interesting. People, and then we've talked about this before, how Americans will, are you on a diet? Yes. Are you going to the gym? Yes. Are you religious? Absolutely. I go to church almost all the time. But do you believe in God? Absolutely. But in actual point of fact, not so much. Maybe a quarter of Americans at this point, which would then put us basically in the same secularization pattern as much of Western Europe, which is one of the anomalies, is that the U.S. is consistently lower in those terms. Do note that estimates put the worldwide total of atheists at something around 7% of the world population, or roughly 500 million people. So that's where kind of a snapshot of where we are today. Trends have not reversed; they have not changed very much, and the exodus of the younger people continues. And that's what I want to talk about more tomorrow. I pulled this off the net. Millennials are killing the napkin industry. Millennials are killing the golf industry. Now millennials are killing marmalade. Millennials are killing gyms too. Yes, and millennials are killing the doorbell industry by texting here. And yes, millennials seem to be killing everything. So what up is that? And how are millennials killing religion in America? Last thing I do want to mention today is a retraction. I showed a slide yesterday that Pope did not actually say this quote in this particular quote. This is taken from a homily that he did give, but the words are compressed in such a way as to make them look more liberal than they actually were in its context. And that's one of the things we want to do as fact-based people, is to be sure that we put things in context. So the Pope is not as liberal as he sounds in the quote I used yesterday about not necessarily having to believe in God as a good person and going to church and that kind of thing, which only indicates that Ralph Waldo Emerson in 1838 was already more forward thinking than the Pope is today, which we sort of already knew as Unitarian Universalists and Transcendentalists and Humanists. So there you have it. Thanks a whole lot for listening today. I know I threw a lot of numbers at you. If you want to watch them again, just to kind of think about it, definitely you can do that on Facebook and then on the Den of Conversation, our YouTube channel. Thanks for all you do for First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis. You can help us out by going to firstunitariansociety.org/donate, or you can give on PayPal to keep humanism going strong. Also tonight, Bibles and Beer, a humanist Bible study. You can join us tonight at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. Tonight, we will be considering the book of Philemon, which is a letter of Paul that has been used to justify slavery over the years. What does it really say? And that's what we're going to be doing today, is looking a little bit more closely at what the text actually says, not just what has been kind of put on, slathered on like butter over the centuries. So thanks a lot for listening, and I'll see you at 9 a.m. Central Time tomorrow with a look at millennials and the nuns. Thank you.